Chapter 1: The Thing in the Smokehouse. Dawn came to the prairie the way it always did, without apology and without a soul to witness it but Silas Crane. He stood on the porch of the low ranch house with a tin cup of coffee going cold in his hand, and watched the light come up gray over a land that ran flat and endless to every edge of the world. There were no trees to speak of, only the long grass moving like water when the wind walked through it, and the far blue line of hills that a man could ride toward for 3 days and never seem to reach. It was a country that made you small. Silas had made his peace with being small a long time ago. He drank his coffee. The cattle were dark shapes down by the creek, and the sound of them, that low, patient shifting, was the only sound there was. It suited him. A man who lived alone learned to hear the difference between the silence that meant everything was right and the silence that meant something wasn't. This morning the silence was right, or near enough, and Silas let himself stand a moment longer than the work allowed before he tossed the dregs of the cup into the dirt and went to see about the day. There was always the day. That was the mercy of ranch work and its cruelty both, that it never ran out, that the fences always wanted mending, and the well always wanted checking, and the stock always wanted counting, so that a man could pour himself into it hour on hour and never come to the bottom of it, and never have to sit still long enough to hear what the stillness would tell him. Silas had learned to love the work the way a drowning man loves a plank. It kept him up. It kept his hands busy and his mind narrow, and it asked nothing of his heart, and for 3 years that had been exactly the amount of asking he could bear. The house behind him held 1 bed, 1 table, 2 chairs, though he only ever used the one. The second chair had been Mary's. She had been 3 years in the ground now, out past the garden fence under a stone he'd cut himself, and in 3 years he had not moved the chair nor sat in it, and could not have said why. Grief in a man like Silas did not weep or wail. It kept house. It set a chair just so and left it, and got up before the sun and did the work and asked nothing of anybody. He was 36, and he had decided, without ever putting words to the decision, that the tender part of his life was finished, and the rest of it would be labor and weather and his own good word, and that this would be enough. A man's word was the one thing the prairie could not take from him. He had built his whole life on that single stubborn stone. So he did not, at first, think much of the bread. It was 3 days back he'd noticed it, a half loaf gone from the tin box in the smokehouse where it kept cool, and him certain he'd left it whole. He'd frowned at the empty space and thought, coyote, and thought no more of it, though a coyote would have wanted the meat and left the bread. The next morning a strip of jerky was missing from the line, just one, plucked neat off the string. Then the milking pail, which he set upside down on the same fence post every night of his life, was found the right way up and moved the length of a hand. Small things, the kind of thing a man could talk himself out of. A drifter, maybe, passing through in the dark and taking what wouldn't be missed, already 20 miles gone by daylight. Silas told himself that story for 2 days and did not believe it, because a drifter took what he could carry and moved on, and whatever this was kept coming back. On the 4th night he stopped telling himself stories and sat up to watch. He put out the lamp early and let the house go dark, and he took his rifle and a horse blanket to the corner of the barn where the shadow of the loft fell black across the yard, and he sat down against the wall to wait. The cold came up out of the ground. The stars wheeled slow and enormous overhead, more stars than any town would ever let a man see, and Silas sat under them without moving while the night wore on toward its middle. An owl went over once, silent. Somewhere far off a coyote sang and was answered, and that was not what he was waiting for, and he knew it. He had time, sitting there, to turn the small things over in his mind, and find them stranger than he'd let himself allow. A drifter did not come back a 4th night to a place he'd already robbed. A coyote did not set a milk pail upright. Whatever this was had a care to it, a kind of terrible thrift, took the bread but left the tin, took 1 strip of jerky off a full line when it might have taken the whole. It was the thieving of something that meant to keep on living off this one place a while, and to do it small enough that it might not be noticed and driven off. That care was what troubled him most, sitting in the dark. Hunger he understood. It was the patience of the hunger that made the hair stand up on his arms. It was past midnight when the smokehouse door breathed open. He had oiled that hinge himself, so it made no sound, but he saw the pale wedge of dark widen against the darker wall, and he went still all the way through, the way he'd learned to go still glassing for wolves. A shape slipped out low and quick, hugging the ground, and made for the meat line with a thief's economy of motion. Small, too small for a man. Silas rose up off the wall without a sound, the rifle coming level out of long habit. And he crossed the yard in 6 long strides and said, in a voice like a door dropped shut, "Hold it." The shape spun, and it was a boy. Not a coyote, not a drifter, not any of the things Silas had let himself expect. A boy, 12 years old at the most, planted between Silas and the black mouth of the smokehouse with his boot heels dug in and a rusted skinning knife thrust out in front of him in a fist that shook so hard the blade trembled. His face in the starlight was all bone and hollow, filthy, streaked, the eyes in it enormous and burning. He did not run. That was the thing Silas would remember. Every instinct in a starved child is to bolt, and this one had chosen instead to stand, to put himself and his shaking little knife square in the path of a grown man with a rifle. And Silas understood in the space of a breath that the boy was not standing his ground for himself. "Easy," Silas said. He did not lower the gun, but he did not raise it either. "Easy now, put that down before you cut yourself." "You put yours down." The boy's voice cracked in the middle of it, and he hated that it did. Silas could see him hate it. "You put yours down and back off, and I'll cut you, mister. I swear before God I will." "I don't doubt it." Silas kept his tone level and slow, the tone he'd used to gentle a spooked colt. "You been in my bread. So shoot me for it." And then from the dark behind the boy, from inside the smokehouse itself, a smaller voice said, "Eli." It was thin and high and frightened, a girl's voice, very young, and it came from down low near the ground where a child would crouch hiding. The boy, Eli, flinched as though he'd been struck, and his eyes went sick with the knowing that he'd been given away, and he said, "Stay back, Nell. Stay back, don't you come out here." But she was already coming, a small, pale ghost of a thing edging out around the doorframe with her fists knotted in her brother's shirt-tail, and the starlight fell on the two of them together, and Silas Crane felt something go over in his chest like a stone turning. They were starving. Not hungry, starving, the both of them, the girl no more than 7 with her wrists like green sticks and her collarbone standing out sharp above a dress gone to rags, and the boy no better under his defiance, all edges, all hollows, held up by nothing but will. They were filthy past washing and thin past hiding it, and they had been living, he understood, in the wild places and the empty places for a long and terrible while. The girl's feet were bare. In this cold on this ground, her feet were bare and blue. Silas lowered the rifle. He did it slow, so the boy would see it was true, and he set the butt of it down in the dirt and stood with his hand loose on the barrel, and he said nothing for a moment because his throat had gone tight in a way it had not gone tight in 3 years. "There now," he said finally. "Nobody's pointing anything at anybody." The boy did not lower the knife. If anything, he pressed the girl behind him with his free hand, wedging his body between her and Silas, and his chin came up. "You want the sheriff," he said. It was not a question. It had the flat certainty of a thing he'd rehearsed, a thing he'd known was coming his whole short life. "Fine, you want to turn somebody in, you turn me in. I done the stealing. It was all me. She never took nothing." He swallowed. You take me to town, tell 'em whatever you want. I won't fight you no more, just..." And here the voice cracked again, and this time he could not master it. "Just let her go. Let her run. She's little, she can't do no harm to nobody. Just let her run off and don't tell 'em about her. That's the deal. That's the whole deal." "Eli," the little girl whispered, horrified. "No." "Hush," he didn't look back at her. He kept his burning eyes on Silas. "That's the deal, mister." And Silas understood the shape of it then, the whole cruel shape of it, though he did not yet know the particulars, that the worst thing in this boy's world was not hunger and not cold, and not a rancher's rifle in the dark. The worst thing in the world was being taken from her, that the boy would sooner hand himself over to whatever waited in town, workhouse, or jail, or worse, than let the two of them be split apart. He had walked God knew how many miles of empty country holding that one thing off, and now he stood in a stranger's yard offering up his own body to buy his sister one more chance to run, and he meant it, every word, at 12 years old. Silas Crane had planned a quiet life. He had planned to rise before the sun and do the work, and keep his own good word and go into the ground someday out by the garden fence beside Mary and trouble no one and be troubled by no one. And it had been a good plan, and it had cost him nothing but everything. He looked at the boy with the knife. He looked at the little girl's blue bare feet. He thought of the chair he had never moved. "There isn't any deal," he said. The boy's face began to break. He'd heard it as a refusal, heard it as the sheriff and the splitting and the end. And Silas saw it start to break and got the rest of it out fast, before the boy could bolt or bleed or do anything foolish. Because nobody's going anywhere tonight. He said it plain. He said it the way he said everything he meant to stand behind, quiet and level and final, a man laying down his word like a stone he did not intend to pick back up. You hear me? Not to town, not into the dark, nowhere. It's cold and it's late and you're both near dead on your feet. He nodded once toward the yellow-black shape of the house. There's stew on the stove. It's yours if you want it. For a long moment nobody moved at all. The wind walked through the long grass and the stars turned, and the little girl looked up at her brother's face to learn from it whether this was a thing to believe. And the knife at last began to come down. Chapter 2, 2 plates, then 3. The stew had gone thick on the stove, the way it always did when Silas let it sit past its hour, but neither child seemed to mind. He set 2 bowls on the plank table and stood back, and for a moment the only sound in the whole dark house was the scrape of spoons. They ate like animals. There was no gentler word for it. The boy Eli hunched over his bowl with one arm curled around it as though Silas might reach across and snatch it back, and he spooned the stew into his mouth so fast he choked twice and did not slow. The girl was worse to watch because she was smaller, and because she made a small sound with each swallow, a low, grateful hum she did not seem to know she was making. Nell. He had heard the boy call her Nell out there in the dark of the smokehouse when the whole thing came apart. Silas leaned against the doorframe and let them eat and said nothing. He had seen hungry men before. He had been a hungry man himself once, a long time back, before the ranch and before Mary and before all the quiet years. But there was a particular thing about watching a child eat that way. It sat under his breastbone like a stone. It told him more than any answer they could give him. It told him how long they had been walking, and how empty the country behind them had been, and it made something in him go still and careful. There's more, he said when Eli's bowl showed its bottom. Pots on the stove, nobody's counting. The boy's head came up. His eyes were the wary flat color of a cornered dog's, and they went to Silas and then to the door, and then to his sister in that order, always in that order. We don't need charity, Eli said. It ain't charity, it's stew. Sit down, you're already sitting. Silas crossed to the stove, took the boy's bowl without asking, and filled it again. He filled the girl's too. When he set them back down, Nell looked up at him with a whole face full of something he did not have a name for, and he had to turn away and busy his hands with the coffee. Thank you, mister, Nell said. Nell, the boy said sharply. He filled my bowl. I know what he did. She went back to eating. Silas poured himself coffee he did not want and sat across from them and looked at the two of them in the yellow lamplight, and now that they were not starving quite so hard he could see them properly. The boy was 12, maybe, though hunger had pared him down to something older around the eyes. The girl could not be more than 7. Their clothes had been good once and were rags now, mud-stiff at the hems, and the girl's shoes had come apart at the toe so that he could see the small, dirty foot inside. How long you two been out, he said, not a question quite. Eli's jaw worked. For a while Silas thought he would not answer at all. A while, the boy said finally. That your answer to everything? It's my answer to you. Silas almost smiled and stopped himself because the boy would have taken it wrong. Fair enough, he said instead. A man doesn't owe a stranger his history over one bowl of stew. 2 bowls, Nell said. 2 bowls, then? This time he did not stop the smile, and it went to the girl and not the boy, and she gave him a shy, crooked one back with stew on her chin. It was the girl who told it in the end. Children that age could not hold a silence the way their older brothers could. It leaked out of her in pieces between spoonfuls, while Eli watched Silas's face the whole time to see what he would do with each piece. Their folks had a place 2 counties east, or 3, Nell was not sure. There had been a fever in the spring. It took her mother first and then her father inside of a week, and it had wanted to take her too, but she got better and did not remember much of it. When she woke up clear-headed, the house was quiet and Eli's hands were all torn up. He dug them, Nell said, matter of fact in the way only a small child could be about a thing that large. Mama and Papa, he dug the holes himself. It took him 2 days on account of the ground being hard. Nell, the boy's voice had gone rough. Well, you did. Silas kept his eyes on his coffee. He did not look at the boy because he understood all at once and completely that the boy could not be looked at just then. 12 years old and a fever house, and 2 days of digging in hard spring ground with a shovel too big for him, and then nobody left to tell him he had done right. Silas had buried one person in his life, and it had nearly finished him. and he had been a grown man with neighbors who came and stood beside the hole. He turned his coffee cup a slow quarter turn on the table and let the boy have his moment to get his face back. After, Silas said gently to the girl, "What you do after?" "We walked," Nell said. "Eli said we couldn't stay account of the wagon." "What wagons?" And here the boy came back into it, because this was the thing that mattered. This was the thing worth breaking his silence for. He set his spoon down. "There's a wagon comes through," Eli said. "Children's home wagon. Man drives it around and picks up kids that ain't got folks, says he's placing them." His mouth twisted around the word. "Back home there was the Doll kids, 4 of them after their pa passed. That wagon come and took all 4 and split them up. Sent the 2 boys off to a mill someplace and the girls to 2 different houses to work, and nobody ever heard the whole 4 of them was ever in one room again. They just went different directions." He looked at Silas now, straight on, and there was nothing of the child in it at all. "That ain't happening to us. I told her. Whatever else happens, that ain't happening." "They don't split us." "They won't," Nell said, comfortable, certain. "The way you say a thing your brother has promised you so many times it has become simply true, like weather." Silas sat with that a while. "That why you ran," he said. "Not from the fever, from the wagon." "From anybody who'd hand us to the wagon." The boy's eyes did not waver. "Sheriffs, church folks, ranchers." He let that last one sit there in the air between them so there could be no mistake about what he meant. "I see," Silas said. And he did see. He saw the whole shape of it now, the miles of it, the nights of it. 2 children walking a country that had a place for orphans, and the place was a cruelty, hiding from the very people who would have called themselves kind. Stealing bread from a smokehouse, because to knock on the door and ask was to risk the wagon. He had lain in wait tonight expecting a coyote or a drifter, and he had caught instead the plain fact of what the world did to children with no one left to stand between them and it. "Well," he said, and got up and took the empty bowls because he needed his hands to be doing something. "It's late. You can bed down tonight and figure your road in the morning, one night. I'm not the wagon and I'm not sending for it." "Why?" Eli said. "Why what?" "Why let us stay? You don't know us. We stole off you." The boy's chin came up, defiant even in this, even in being helped. "Say what you want out of it." Silas set the bowls in the wash basin. Outside, the wind came off the prairie and leaned on the house and went on, the way it did every night of his life, the great empty sound he had lived inside of for 3 years alone. "I don't want anything out of it," he said. "It's a cold night and there's room, that's the whole of it. You can trust that or not, but you'll sleep warm either way." He made them a place by the stove, an old tick mattress hauled down from the loft and 2 of Mary's quilts that had been folded in the cedar chest, so long they smelled of nothing but cedar. The girl was asleep before he had the second quilt tucked. The boy lay down at the outside edge, between his sister and the room, between his sister and Silas, and he did not close his eyes. Silas took the lamp and left them the low, banked glow of the stove. He did not sleep much himself. Somewhere past midnight he heard the boy get up, quiet as a cat, and stand a while at the window looking out at the dark yard, and then lie back down. Silas lay in his own bed on the other side of the wall and listened to a house that had 2 more people breathing in it than it had held in 3 years, and found he did not mind the sound. In the morning the coin was gone. It was a silver $50 he kept on the mantel, had kept there since Mary, and he did not need to hunt for it to know. The boy was gone with it. Nell still slept curled small under the cedar quilts, and Eli's place at the edge was empty and cold. Silas stood on his porch in the gray dawn and read the ground the way he read everything, plain and without heat. The tracks went east and they went fast at first, and then they slowed, the way a boy slowed when the running caught up to him, when whatever he thought he was doing turned in his hands and became only a boy alone on a big prairie in the cold with a stolen coin and a sister sleeping in another man's house. He saddled the roan and rode out after him. He did not take the rifle. He found Eli 2 miles on, sitting on a rock with his knees drawn up, not running any more, just sitting, the coin gripped in his fist so hard the knuckles had gone white. The boy heard the horse and his whole body went tight, waiting for it, the shout, the strap, the law, the wagon after all. Silas reined up. He looked down at the boy a moment. Then he swung out of the saddle and sat himself down on the same rock, not close, and looked out at the same nothing the boy was looking at, and said not one word about the coin. "Your sister's going to want breakfast," he said after a while. I don't cook a hot cake worth eating. You any good at it? The boy stared at him, his mouth opened and shut. Whatever he had braced himself against, it had not come, and the not coming had undone him more than any strap could have. His fist opened. The $50 sat there in his dirty palm, and he held it out, and his hand was shaking. Keep it, Silas said. Man ought to have a little something in his pocket, come on. It's cold. They rode back double on the roan, the boy in front, stiff as a board, and then, mile by mile, not. When they came over the last rise, the house sat there in the new sun, with smoke going up straight from the chimney where the stove still held its heat, and a small figure had come out onto the porch and was standing on her toes looking for them. That night when Silas came to bank the stove, Nell was already half under, her eyes closed, her voice thick and slow with sleep. "Mister," she murmured, "I'm here. Can we stay," a long, slow breath, "just till the grass turns?" He crouched by the mattress. The fire ticked. Across the room the boy lay listening in the dark, pretending not to, and Silas knew it and answered them both. "Yeah," he said, "just till the grass turns." And something in him that had been closed and locked for 3 years turned over once in the dark, quiet as a key, and let a little of the cold night in and did not shut again. Chapter 3, Learning the Land. The grass did not turn all at once. It went slow, the way everything on the prairie went slow, greening from the roots up until the whole spread of it rolled to the horizon like water with the wind combing it. Silas Crane had lived 36 years watching that grass come and go, and he had never once, in all that time, watched it with 2 children at his elbow arguing over whose turn it was to carry the milk pail. "It's mine," Nell said. "You had it yesterday." "I had it yesterday because you spilled it the day before," Eli said. "I did not spill it, the cow spilled it." Silas kept his face to the barn so they would not see it move. A month back he had eaten his supper in a silence so complete he could hear the coals settle. Now he could not hear himself think, and he found, to his considerable surprise, that he did not miss the quiet at all. He taught the boy to ride first. Eli sat a horse the way he did everything, braced for it to hurt him, and the gray mare felt it and danced sideways until the 2 of them were a knot of nerves in the middle of the yard. "You're squeezing her like she's the last thing in the world," Silas said. "She feels your fear, she gives it back. Sit easy. Let your weight down through your seat. She'll carry you if you let her. And if she throws me, then you get up and you get on again. You don't quit a thing halfway. Not a horse, not a fence, not a day's work. You start it, you finish it. That's the whole of it." Eli looked at him a long moment, and something behind the wariness shifted, the way a stone shifts before it rolls. He gathered the reins. He sat down into the saddle instead of on top of it, and the mare stilled, and after a while the 2 of them went around the corral at a walk that turned into a jog, and the boy's face, Lord, the boy's face, cracked into a grin he seemed to have forgotten he owned. "I'm doing it," he called. "Silas, I'm doing it." "I see you," Silas said. "Told you she'd carry you." Roping came harder. Eli threw the loop 100 times at a set of steer horns Silas had nailed to a post, and 100 times it slid off wrong, and the boy's jaw got tighter and tighter until Silas took the rope from his hands. "You're throwing it angry," Silas said. "A rope don't care how you feel, it only cares that you mean it. Watch." He rolled the loop once, easy, and it settled over the horns clean as a thought. "You don't fight it home, you put it where it's going and you trust it to get there, now again." "That's the 81st time you've said again." "Then here comes 82. By the end of the week, the boy could catch the post 4 throws in 5, and he walked to supper coiling the rope over his shoulder like a man who owned it. Nell had no interest in ropes. Nell had appointed herself queen of the henhouse, and she named the chickens, all 11 of them, after people in a story she could not read but had memorized from someone telling it to her long ago. There was a fat red hen called Duchess, and a scrawny one called Preacher, and a mean speckled one she called Aunt Marion in a tone that suggested Aunt Marion had earned it. "You can't name a chicken," Eli told her. "You'll cry when we eat it." "We're not eating Duchess," Nell said, scandalized. "Silas, tell him we're not eating Duchess." "We're not eating Duchess," Silas said. Eli rolled his eyes, but Silas caught him, 2 days later, shooing a hawk off the henhouse roof and muttering, "Not today, you don't." And Silas said nothing, only felt the thing in his chest that had no name go warm again. That was how the spring went. The children learned the land, and the land, slow and unsentimental, made room for them. And the man learned that his word, which he had spent his life keeping only to himself, could be a thing he laid down like a plank across the empty places in two small people, and that they would walk across it and trust it to hold. It could not last hidden. He knew that even as he let himself forget it. It was old Tandy Muller who tore the seam. Silas rode into town for flour and nails and coffee, and Muller was leaning on the rail outside the mercantile with his pipe, and he squinted at the wagon and said, loud enough for the porch to hear, "Heard you took on help out your way, Crane. Didn't figure you for a man who'd share his coffee." Silas kept his voice level. "Heard wrong, likely. Wilkins' boy said he saw kids up on your ridge, 2 of 'em." Muller sucked his pipe. "Little ones," he said. "Wilkins' boy sees a lot from that far off." But he felt it, the words already loose and traveling, town to town the way words did out here where a piece of news was worth more than money because it cost nothing to carry. He loaded his wagon with his jaw set and thought, I can't hide them. Not forever. Not in a country this empty, where the sight of a stranger is an event and 2 strange children a legend inside a week. He was still turning it over, dark, when a voice broke across the street clear as a struck bell. "You'll drop that sack of sugar if you carry it by the corner, you know. It'll split right at the seam." He looked up. A woman stood in the shade of the schoolhouse eave with a stack of slates against her hip, watching him with a mouth that wanted to smile and eyes that were already ahead of him. She was maybe 30, brown-haired, plainly dressed, and there was a steadiness to her that Silas recognized because he had spent his life trying to build the same thing in himself. "I've carried sugar before," he said. "I don't doubt it. I've just watched 3 men split 3 sacks on that exact spot this month, and I got tired of watching good sugar go in the dirt." She shifted the slates. "Hannah Reed, I keep the school." "Silas Crane." "I know who you are, Mr. Crane. Everyone knows who you are. You're the man who doesn't come to town." Now she did smile, and it was a good smile, unhurried. "And yet here you are, twice in a fortnight, buying twice the flour a single man could eat." He said nothing. She had a way of setting a true thing down between them without making it a question, so a man could pick it up or leave it lie. It was Nell who decided it. She had climbed down off the wagon seat and drifted to the schoolhouse window, and she stood on her toes with her hands cupped to the glass, staring in at the slates and the primers and the map on the wall like a starved thing at a bakery. "What are those letters?" she asked to no one to the window. Hannah Reed crouched down to her level, easy, no sudden moves, the way Silas himself had learned to move around these 2. "Those are the whole alphabet," she said. "Every word there ever was is made out of just those. Can you read them?" Nell shook her head, and her face did a thing Silas had not seen it do. It closed, ashamed. "Ma was going to teach me," she said. "She didn't get to." Something passed over the schoolteacher's face, quick and soft, and then it was gone and only the warmth was left. "Well," she said, "that's no fault of yours, and it's the easiest thing in the world to fix. What's your name?" "Nell." "Nell." Hannah stood and looked at Silas, and the question in her eyes was for him now, not the child. "I keep afternoons free most days. It would be no trouble to me. A child ought to be able to read her own name, Mr. Crane, and she wants it. You can see she wants it." He could see it, that was the trouble. He could see it plain as the sun, and it opened up in front of him a whole country of things he had not let himself want. Lessons and Sundays, and a woman crouched in the dust, talking gentle to a girl who had gone hungry so long she thought hunger was her own fault. "I'll think on it," he said, which was as close as Silas Crane came to yes. "Do," she straightened the slates, then lower so it stayed between the 2 of them. "You'll want to think on the other thing too while you're at it. Folks are asking, whose are they and where's their people and who says you've the keeping of them?" She held his eye, not unkind, only honest. "A child needs papers same as a horse needs a brand out here. Somebody comes asking and you've got nothing to show, no name on a line, no judge's mark. The law doesn't care how good you've been to them. It only cares whose they are on paper. And right now, Mr. Crane, they're nobodies." The words dropped into him and sank cold, to a place that had felt warm all spring. "They're mine," he said before he knew he would say it. Hannah Reed studied him a moment. "I believe you," she said quietly, "but belief isn't the same as a document. See that it becomes one." She touched Nell's shoulder in parting, light as a leaf, and went back into her school. He drove home slow, the wagon creaking, Eli asleep against the sacks, and Nell awake beside him watching the grass go gold in the falling light. For a long while neither of them spoke, and the wheels ate the miles, and Silas turned the schoolteacher's words over and over until they had worn smooth and heavy in his hand. Right now they're nobodies. They were not nobodies. He knew whose they were the way he knew the shape of his own hands. But the country did not run on what a man knew. It ran on what a man could prove, and Silas had built his whole life on his word being proof enough, and now here was the world telling him that his word, for the first time, might not be worth the paper it wasn't written on. Silas, Nell said. She was quiet a moment, working up to it. Then, the lady said a child ought to read her own name. She looked up at him, and the last of the day was in her eyes. When I write it, my name, what do I put after it? After it? Eli says a name's got two parts, a first for you and a second for who you belong to. She frowned at the road ahead. Mine used to have a second part, but that was Ma and Pa's, and they're gone. She twisted her small hands in her lap. So when the lady teaches me and I write it down, what do I call you? On the line, what are you to me? The prairie ran on to the edge of the world, empty and gold and vast, and Silas Crane, who had an answer for a green horse and a lost boy and a hawk on the henhouse roof, who had built a whole self out of always having the answer. Silas opened his mouth and found that he had none. He gripped the reins, the horse plodded on. Beside him the child waited, trusting he would speak the way she had learned all spring to trust it, and the not speaking stretched out between them and filled up with everything he could not yet say. Could not, because to say it aloud was to make a promise, and a promise from Silas Crane was a thing that could not be unmade, and he did not yet know if the world would let him keep it. That's a big question, Nell, he said at last, and his voice was not steady, and he hated that she heard it. I know, she said softly, and she leaned her head against his arm and did not ask again, and somehow that was worse than if she had. They rode the rest of the way home in the aching quiet, the grass gone dark on either side, and above them the first stars came out over a house that was full now, and warm and on paper belonged to no one at all. Chapter 4, The Schoolteacher. The first morning Hannah Reed came out to the ranch. Silas Crane found himself sweeping a porch that had not been swept in the whole 4 years since his wife died. He caught himself at it, broom in hand, and stood a moment feeling the foolishness of it warm his neck. The boards were as clean as they were ever going to get. He set the broom against the rail and looked out at the wagon road where a thin curl of dust told him she was already coming, a mile off yet, small and patient against the great green sweep of the prairie. You're fixing to wear a hole in that floor, Eli said from the doorway. I'm fixing to look like I keep a decent house, Silas said. They're a difference to you. No, sir, but the boy's mouth had a crook in it and Silas let him keep it. Nell had no such reserve. She had been at the window since before her oatmeal, on her knees on the bench with her elbows on the sill, and when the wagon finally rolled into the yard, she was off the bench and out the door before Silas could tell her to mind her manners. Hannah climbed down laughing, a slate under one arm and a bundle of books tied in string under the other, and Nell caught her about the waist as if she meant to knock her flat. You came, Nell said into her skirts. You truly came all this way. I said I would. Hannah smoothed the child's hair back off her forehead. And a person who says a thing had best do it. Isn't that right, Mr. Crane? Silas had come down the steps to take the horse. Their eyes met over the top of Nell's head, and he found he had to look away to answer her and did not know why. That's right, he said. It is. They set the lessons up at the kitchen table, in the good light of the south window, and Silas told himself he had work enough in the barn to keep him gone the whole of it. He did not stay gone. He came in for a coffee that did not need drinking, and then to fetch a bridle that hung in plain sight of the table. And each time he came the sound in the kitchen stopped him at the door. Nell's small voice sounding out letters, slow and stubborn, and Hannah's low, and even beneath it, never hurrying her, never once letting the child feel the size of what she did not know. "Cat," Nell said, cat. There now, and what has 4 legs and gives us milk, and lets you name her whatever fool thing comes into your head. Buttercup, said Nell, and Daisy, and the mean one is Mrs. Pickett after the woman who. The word, Miss Nell. Nell bent to the slate, tongue between her teeth. C-O-W. Cow, you have it. And there was such a plainness in the way Hannah said it, no more and no less than the thing deserved, that Silas stood in the doorway with the bridle forgotten in his hand, and thought he had never in his life heard a kinder sound than a woman telling a child she had done right. Hannah looked up and caught him there. She did not say anything about it, but she smiled, and it was not the smile she gave the children, and Silas nodded once, stiff as a fence post, and took himself back out to the barn. Eli did not warm to her. Silas watched it over the first days the way a man watches weather build on the flat, no hurry to it, but no missing it either. The boy would take his place at the far end of the porch when the lessons ran, close enough to hear, far enough to make his point, and he would whittle at a stick with the knife Silas had given him and say nothing at all. When Hannah spoke to him, he answered in the fewest words a body could and still be counted civil. When she praised Nell, something went tight across his young face, and Silas understood it well enough, having worn the same look himself over the years. Here was a woman come to give his sister a thing he could not give her, and it shamed the boy, and shame in the young came out sideways as suspicion. Hannah understood it too. That was the wonder of her. She did not press him. She did not call him over to the table or make bright talk at him or any of the things a lesser woman might have done to win a sullen child and only driven him deeper. She let him be. And then, on the fourth day, when the lesson was done and Nell had gone chasing a hen across the yard, Hannah gathered her books and walked the length of the porch and stopped a respectful distance from where Eli sat. "Your sister tells me you buried your folks yourself," she said. "With your own 2 hands, is that so?" Eli's knife went still on the wood. "It's so." "That's a hard thing," Hannah said. "A man's thing. I don't imagine there was anyone to tell you how." "Wasn't nobody to tell me anything." He did not look up. "Did it the way seemed right." "I expect it was right then." She said it simply, the way she said cow, the way she said there now. "A house doesn't run itself, and neither does a family. Somebody's got to hold it up while it's coming apart. You held yours." She shifted the books on her hip. "I only came to teach the reading, Eli. I didn't come to take anything that's yours to keep. I'd not know how, and I'd not want to." For a long moment the boy said nothing. The hen squawked. Nell laughed somewhere out past the well. Then Eli looked up at her, and it was a different look than he'd worn all week, measuring, but no longer walled. "She can't hardly read a lick," he said. "Our ma was going to teach her before." "Then we'll finish what your ma started," Hannah said. "You and me both. I could use a strong hand to keep her at it when I'm not here. She minds you." Eli considered that as gravely as if she'd offered him a partnership in a cattle concern. "I'll keep her at it," he said at last. "I'd be obliged," said Hannah, and went on down the steps, and did not make a fuss of it. And that was how she won him, by asking him for something instead of giving, by treating the boy of 12 like the man he'd been made too soon to be. Silas, splitting wood at the block, had heard the whole of it and struck a rail clean in 2 with a blow that didn't need to be near so hard. She stayed to supper that night, the first time, though nobody had exactly asked, and nobody would have dreamed of letting her go. Silas fried up ham and Hannah made a corn pudding from what was in the larder, moving about his dead wife's kitchen with a care that was not quite ease, but was trying to be, asking him where a thing was kept before she touched it. They ate by lamplight with the door open to the cool coming off the grass, and Nell talked the entire meal without once being hushed, and Eli ate 3 helpings and let himself be caught smiling twice. After Hannah sang, it came out of nowhere, a low tune about a river, the kind of thing a mother hums without knowing she's begun, and Nell climbed up into her lap uninvited and put her head under Hannah's chin, and by the second verse the child was asleep. Hannah went on singing softer so as not to wake her. Her hand moved slow over Nell's back. And Silas sat across the table in his own house and looked at the picture the 2 of them made in the lamplight, the woman and the sleeping child, and felt something shift in his chest that he had spent 4 years making sure could not shift again. He got up quiet and took his coffee to the door and stood looking out at the dark, so that his face would be his own business. "You've made a good home for them," Hannah said behind him low. "I want you to know I see it. Whatever they were when they came to you, they don't wear it now." "They did the making," Silas said to the dark. "I only left the door open." "No," he heard the chair ease as she settled Nell's weight. "A man leaves a door open, that's one thing. A man like you doesn't do it without knowing what it costs him." "I'd not mistake the one for the other." She let a moment go by. "You needn't say anything to that. I only think a good thing ought to be named out loud now and again, or a body forgets to believe it's true." Silas did not turn around. He was afraid of what his face would do. "That's a schoolteacher's notion," he said, but there was no edge to it, and she took none. "It is," she agreed warm. "It's the only trade I've got." He carried Nell up to her bed himself later, and Eli walked Hannah's horse round from the barn without being told, and stood holding the bridle while she climbed to the wagon seat, a small courtesy. But Silas marked how the boy had come round to her without ever quite meaning to. What Silas did not know, and would not know for days yet, was that 30 miles off in the town of Ashford's Crossing, a stranger had ridden in that same afternoon and put up his horse at the livery and gone straight to the mercantile. He was a soft-looking man in a good coat gone dusty from the road, with a way of smiling that never quite reached above his mouth. He'd bought a twist of tobacco he did not appear to want and leaned on the counter and got to talking easy, the way traveling men do. "Wonder if you might help a man on an errand of some delicacy," he said to the storekeeper. "I'm in the way of finding lost children, runaways, strays, orphans of the fever, sad business, but somebody's got to see them placed. There's 2 I'm after in particular, a brother and sister. Boy near 13, girl maybe 7 or 8, come through this country in the spring, I'm told." He turned the tobacco over in his soft fingers. "There'd be a finder's fee in it, for the party that pointed me right. Worth a good deal, a matched pair like that, to the parties I answer to." The storekeeper allowed as how he hadn't seen any such children. "No," said the stranger and smiled his smile. "No, I don't suppose folks notice, but children have a way of turning up, friend. They eat, and eating leaves a trail." He laid a coin on the counter for the tobacco and a second one beside it and left the second one there when he went. "Ezra Boone," he said, touching his hat at the door. "I'll be about a few days." "You think on it." It was near dusk when Hannah's wagon rolled out of the ranch yard, and Silas walked her as far as the gate on foot, one hand on the wheel rim, neither of them in any hurry to be done. The prairie had gone gold, and then to the deep blue that comes after, and the first stars were pricking out over the far dark line of the hills. She drew rein at the road and looked down at him. "Those children," she said. "Look at you like you hung the moon up there yourself, Silas Crane. I don't think you've noticed it, being so busy pretending you don't." The use of his given name went through him like a struck match. He put his hand up to the horse's cheek so as to have somewhere to put it. There were words in him. He could feel the shape of them, plain as the reins in a man's fist, and he opened his mouth to let 1 or 2 of them out into the gold-gone blue air between them. Then he shut it again. "They're good children," he said instead. "Get on home before it's full dark. Road's bad past the ford." Hannah looked at him a moment longer, and whatever she saw there she seemed content to let stand unsaid, the way you leave a good thing named only once. "Good night, then," she said, and clucked to the horse, and the wagon rolled off into the dusk. Silas stood at his own gate a long while after the sound of the wheels had gone, watching the dark come down over the grass, and did not go in until the cold drove him to it. Chapter 5, A Man's Word. The frost had come in the night and gone again by the time Silas Crane finished the milking, and the morning stood clear and cold and blue over the prairie, the grass silvered where the sun had not yet reached it. He came in from the barn with the pail warm against his side, and found the kitchen already alive. Nell knelt on a chair at the table, her tongue caught between her teeth, dragging a stub of pencil down a slate while Eli poked at the fire, and the sight of it stopped Silas in the doorway the way it always did lately, as though he had walked into another man's life and could not quite believe they'd let him keep it. "I made a whole row of them," Nell announced, not looking up. "A whole row of A's. Miss Hannah says a row of A's is worth more than a pocket of gold, only you can't spend it." "That's so," Silas said. He set the pail on the sideboard. "Then you're richer than me before breakfast." She beamed at that, and Eli hid a smile in the fire. Silas had lain awake most of the night with a thing he'd been turning over for weeks, and this morning it had come out plain and finished, the way a length of iron comes out of the forge once you've hammered it long enough. He'd decided. He poured the milk off and did not say it yet, because a man ought to have his words in order before he spends them, and these were words he did not mean to have to say twice. He waited until the plates were cleared, and Nell had run out to feed the chickens she'd named. Every one of them, the whole flock, and woe to the man who ate an egg from prudence. And it was only Eli left at the table, whittling at nothing with the small knife Silas had given him after taking the rusted one away. "Eli." The boy looked up, wary out of old habit. He was less wary than he'd been that first night in the smokehouse, but the wariness had gone into him deep, the way a brand goes deep, and Silas doubted it would ever be all the way gone. "I'm going to town come Thursday," Silas said. Then on to the county seat. There's papers a man can file, guardianship papers. He watched the boy's face and made himself say the rest slow and clear. I mean to sign them. So that you and your sister belong here in the eyes of the law, same as you already belong here in mine. So no man on this earth can come and say otherwise. Eli went very still. The knife stopped in his hand. For good, he said, and it was not quite a question. For good. You don't have to. The boy said it fast, the way he said things he'd decided beforehand so they wouldn't have the chance to hurt him. We can work. We don't eat much. You don't got to put your name on nothing. Eli, Silas leaned forward with his forearms on the table, and the boy fell quiet. A man's word is the only thing he owns that no one can take from him. Everything else, the land, the stock, the roof, a bad year can take it. The bank can take it, but not what he's given his word to. I gave my word the night I found the two of you that nobody was going anywhere. I aim to make that true in ink as well as in my mouth. You understand me? The boy's jaw worked. He was 12, and he had buried his own mother and father with his own 2 hands and walked 100 miles keeping his sister alive. And he had promised himself a long time ago that he would not cry in front of any grown man ever again. Silas watched him lose that fight and pretended, for the boy's sake, to be very interested in the grain of the table. All right, Eli managed, rough. All right. Then Nell was back through the door with straw in her hair, demanding to know what was wrong with Eli. Why was his face like that? And Silas told her plain that he'd decided to keep them. Both of them, for always. In front of the judge and everyone. She did not weep the way her brother had, silent and ashamed. Nell wept the way a child weeps who has been holding her breath for months without knowing it, all at once, loud and shaking. And she flung herself across the kitchen and wrapped her thin arms around Silas's neck and would not let go, and Silas, who had lived alone 11 years, who had buried a wife and told himself he was done needing anything, sat there with the small hot weight of her against his chest and found he had nothing at all to say. So he said nothing. He only put one broad hand against the back of her head and held on, and over the top of her hair he met Eli's eyes, and the two of them, the man and the boy, understood each other completely. Just till the grass turns, Nell hiccuped into his collar, quoting herself from a night in early spring. That's what I said. You did. The grass turned a long time ago. It did, Silas agreed. And you're still here, and here's where you're staying. Hannah came out on Wednesday to give Nell her letters, as she did twice a week now, riding out in her little trap with her books in a satchel and her hair coming loose from its pins by the time she reached the gate. Silas found himself, as he always did, having brushed his coat and put on a clean shirt for no reason he'd admit to. He met her at the trap and handed her down, and her gloved hand rested in his a moment longer than the task required, and neither of them hurried it. He told her, while the children were bent over the slate at the far end of the room, what he meant to do. Hannah set down her chalk. She was a widow and not a girl, and she did not gasp or clutch at things, but something moved across her face that was very near to what Nell's face had done. Silas Crane, she said quietly. Do you know what that means for them? I know what it means. They'll have a name to give when someone asks whose they are. Do you know that's the thing children like that fear most? Not the cold, not the hunger, being no one's. Her eyes had gone bright. You'll have given them somebody to belong to. They gave me the same, Silas said, before he'd weighed whether he ought to, and the words hung there in the warm kitchen between them. Hannah looked at him. The children's pencils scratched at the far end of the room. There was a great deal in her face, and he thought, for one reckless breath, that he might finally say the rest of what had been growing in him all these weeks. That the house had been a tomb until she started coming to it. That he listened for her trap on the road. That when he pictured the years ahead now, there were 4 of them in the picture and not 3. Silas, she began. Nell's got her bee backwards again? Eli called, and the moment folded up and put itself away, and Hannah laughed a little unsteadily and went to fix the bee, and Silas stood in his own kitchen with his heart going like a green boy's and thought that there was time. There would be time for all of it. He would put the papers right first, and set the family on solid ground, and then he would say the words to her that a man ought to say standing up in the light with his hat in his hands. He rode for the county seat Thursday before dawn. The land office at the county seat was a low brick building that smelled of ink and dust, and the clerk behind the counter was a narrow, tired man named Fenwick who'd been stamping papers for 30 years and had the look of someone long past surprise. Silas laid out his business. 2 children orphaned in his keeping. He wished to be made their lawful guardian. Fenwick found him the forms readily enough and set to explaining them, and it was going smooth as milk until Silas gave the children's names. The clerk's pen stopped. He looked up over his spectacles. Eli and Nell, you say, brother and sister, come out of the fever country to the east. That's right. Huh? Fenwick set the pen down and rubbed his jaw, and Silas felt the first cold touch of something he could not yet name. Now that's a queer thing. Had a man in here not 2 weeks back, asking after a pair by that very description. Real particular, called himself a placement agent. He said the words with the faint distaste of a man who dealt in honest paper and knew crooked paper when it walked in wearing a good coat. Said he was appointed to collect 2 wards that had run off. Said he held prior custody and meant to see them returned. The floor of Silas's stomach dropped away, though nothing showed in his face. He had schooled his face for 35 years. This agent, he said evenly, he leave a name. Boone. Fenwick pulled a ledger toward him and ran a yellow nail down the column until he found it. Ezra Boone, left an address that ain't a place if you take my meaning. I've seen his kind before, Mr. Crane, and I'll tell you plain since you seem a decent sort. The clerk lowered his voice, though the office was empty. There's men that have found a trade in orphans. They collect a bounty for gathering up strays, and then they place them, that's the pretty word for it, place them out to the mills and the mines and the big farms as bound labor. Indentured, all legal looking, till they're grown or worked to nothing. The children never see a wage. Boone sees it all. And a matched set, a boy old enough to work and a little one to sweeten some childless house for a fee, that's money to a man like that. That's why he was particular. He had papers. Fenwick's mouth thinned. Looked official, seal and signature and all. I've no proof they weren't. He tapped the ledger. But I've stamped enough true documents to feel it in my thumbs when one's wrong, and my thumbs didn't like his. Silas stood there in the incandescent dark of the office and understood all at once and completely what he was up against. Not a lie he could shout down. A lie dressed in a seal. A forged claim that would look real enough to any sheriff bound to enforce it, and that would ship Eli to a mill 300 miles off and Nell to a stranger's house in the opposite direction. The very splitting the boy had walked 100 miles to prevent, the thing they woke from in the night still fearing. And it would all be done in daylight, legal and cold, by a man in a good coat holding a paper. Give me the forms, Silas said. His voice had gone quiet and level in a way that Eli, had he been there, would have recognized. All of them, and tell me every step it takes to make this true, and how fast a man can do it. Fenwick studied him a moment, then nodded slowly and reached for the stack. It takes a judge, he said. Circuit judge comes through when he comes. And it takes the truth on your side, which I believe you've got. But I'll tell you, Mr. Crane, paper beats paper out here. Whichever man gets his signed and stamped and standing first, that's the man the law will side with, right or wrong, till the other man can prove different. And proving different takes time you may not have. He pushed the forms across the counter. So you'd best not waste any. Silas signed what could be signed that day. He paid what could be paid. He folded the guardianship forms, the ones that still wanted the judge's hand to make them law, and buttoned them careful into the inside of his coat over his heart, where a man keeps a thing he means to defend. Then he thanked Fenwick and shook the clerk's dry hand and walked out into the falling afternoon. He rode home hard. The forms crackled against his chest with every stride, and the resolve in him had gone hard and bright as the frost that morning. He would beat Boone to the judge. He would make it true before the man could make his lie true. He had given his word, and his word would stand, seal or no seal. The sun was low and red over the grass when he came up the last rise, and saw his own house sitting small and gold in the evening light, smoke rising from the chimney where Hannah had likely stayed to see the children fed. And parked in the ranch yard, its horse still in the traces, was a stranger's black buggy. Chapter 6, The Man with the Papers. The buggy sat in the ranch yard like something that had no business being there, its lacquered wheels too clean for the dust of the prairie, its horse a soft-fleshed town animal that had never pulled against real weather. Silas reined in at the mouth of the yard and did not dismount right away. He sat his saddle and looked at the man waiting on his porch, and the guardianship forms folded flat against his chest under his coat felt suddenly like paper and nothing more. The stranger rose from the porch step as though it were his own. He was a narrow man in a gray town suit, clean-shaven, with a smile already fixed in place before Silas had come near enough to earn it. He held his hat against his stomach with both hands, the picture of courtesy, and when he spoke his voice came smooth as poured molasses. "Mr. Crane, I take it, Silas Crane." He said the name like he'd read it somewhere and been pleased to find it true. "My name is Ezra Boone. I've come a long road to speak with you, and I'll thank you for a few minutes of your evening." Silas swung down. He kept the reins in his fist and the horse between himself and the porch a moment longer than he needed to. "You're on my land." "I am, and I beg pardon for the liberty." Boone's smile did not slip. "The lady of the house, forgive me, the young woman keeping your house was good enough to let me wait. And the children, fine children, Mr. Crane, a credit to whoever's raised them these last weeks." The screen door creaked. Silas turned, and there was Nell, small and pale in the doorway with her hair still braided the way Hannah had taught her, and behind her Eli, one hand on his sister's shoulder and the other hidden behind the door frame. Silas knew what was behind that frame. He taught the boy where the rifle stood and how to keep it, and he saw in Eli's white face that the boy had already gone and fetched it. "Get on inside," Silas said to them low. Nell didn't move. She was looking at Boone the way a rabbit looks at a hawk's shadow crossing the grass, and she came instead across the boards and pressed herself against Silas's leg, both her thin arms wrapped around it, her face turned into his trousers so she would not have to see the man. Silas put his hand down flat on the top of her head. He felt her shaking through his palm. "Eli," he said, "put it down." The boy stepped out onto the porch with the rifle up against his shoulder, and though the barrel wavered, his eyes did not. "He's not taking her," Eli said. His voice cracked on the last word, and he hated it. Silas could see, hated that it cracked. "He's not taking either of us. I'll shoot him first." "You'll do no such thing." Silas crossed the yard slow, put himself square between the muzzle and the man, and closed his hand over the barrel, easing it down toward the boards. He held Eli's eyes while he did it. "Not on my porch, not over trash like this. You hear me? A man doesn't hang for the likes of him. Put it down." For a long moment the boy held. Then the fight went out of his arms, and he let Silas take the weight of the gun, and Silas set it against the wall behind the door where it would be near and out of reach both. He kept Nell against his leg. He kept Eli at his shoulder. Only then did he turn back to Boone, who had watched the whole of it with his head tipped and his smile grown a shade warmer, as though the children's terror were a pleasant thing to witness. "Say your piece and get off my land," Silas said. "Gladly." Boone set his hat on the porch rail and drew from inside his coat a leather folder, and from the folder a sheaf of papers thick with print and ribbon and the red wax bloom of a seal. He held them out at arm's length so Silas could see the weight of them without yet taking them. "I'm a placement agent, Mr. Crane, appointed by the state to gather up such orphaned and abandoned minors as have no lawful guardian, and to see them settled, fed, and set to honest work. These two, Eli Harmon, aged 12, and Nell Harmon, aged 7, he read the names off the page, and Silas felt Nell flinch at the sound of them, were made wards of the county the day their parents died of the fever and left no will and no kin to claim them. That claim fell to the state. And the state, Mr. Crane, has appointed me its agent." He let the papers lower. "I've come to collect my wards." The words dropped into the yard and lay there. Silas did not reach for the papers. He looked at the man's face instead, the pleased set of the mouth, and he understood that Boone wanted him to read them, wanted him to hunt through the printed lines for the flaw and find none. "You know their names," Silas said. "I know a great deal. I make it my business to know. It's a poor agent who comes to a man's door not knowing what he asks for." Boone spread his hands, modest about it. "I know their mother and father lie in a double grave a boy dug with his own hands outside a burned-out claim 3 counties east. I know these children have been running and hiding and stealing bread ever since, and I know," the smile again, "that you, Mr. Crane, for all your Christian kindness, are nothing to them under the law. Not father. Not uncle, not guardian. A man who found 2 strays and took them in. There is no paper on this earth that ties you to these children, but there is one that ties them to me." He tapped the seal with one clean finger. Silas thought of the forms folded against his chest. He had carried them home from the land office with a lightness he had not let himself name, thinking the fight was near enough won, thinking a signature and a filing fee stood between these children and every wagon that might ever come for them. Unsigned, unfiled, a week from being worth anything, and a week might as well have been 100 years. The man on his porch had put his boot square on the only week that mattered. "Those children aren't going anywhere with you," he said. "Not tonight. Not any night." Boone sighed as though he'd expected as much and was sorry for it. "I feared you'd take that view. It does you credit and it will do you no good at all. Understand me plainly, Mr. Crane. I don't want a quarrel. I don't want the sheriff. But harboring wards of the state against a lawful order is a crime, and the man who does it can be fined or jailed, and either way loses what he was fighting to keep. I'll be reasonable. I'll give you the night to make your peace with it. He picked up his hat. And tomorrow I'll come back with the sheriff and the law of the county behind me, and you'll hand these children over on my say-so, because there won't be a thing else you can do. It was then that the second buggy came rattling up the lane. No, not a buggy, the schoolteacher's little cart. Hannah Reed driving it herself and driving it fast, her bonnet blown back off her hair. She'd have seen the strange rig from the road and known. She pulled up hard and came down out of the cart before it had fully stopped, and she took in the porch, the children, Silas's face, and the smiling man with the papers, and Silas watched her understand it all in the space of a breath. "Silas," she said, "what is this? This gentleman was just leaving." "Miss Reed, is it?" Boone inclined his head to her with the same old courtesy. "The schoolteacher. You've been kind to the little girl, I'm told. You'll want to prepare her then. Gentle her to it. A clean break is easier on a child than a long goodbye." He came down the porch steps at last, unhurried, and Hannah stepped in close to Silas as he passed so that the two of them stood shoulder to shoulder with the children behind them. Silas took the papers when Boone offered them a last time, took them, and turned through the pages while the man waited, indulgent. And Silas was no lawyer, but he had signed enough bills of sale and deeds and cattle contracts in his life to know the shape of an official document, and these had the shape of it exactly. The right words, the right stamps, the ribbon and the wax, whatever else was wrong with them, and Silas would have staked the ranch that everything was wrong with them, nothing on the face of the page said so. A sheriff would look at them and see the law. A judge in a hurry might see the same. He handed them back. "These are forged." "Are they?" Boone tucked them away without heat, almost fondly. "Prove it. Ride to the county seat and prove it, Mr. Crane, and while you're gone proving it, I'll have collected my wards under a valid order and be 3 counties off. You've a week's worth of proving to do and 1 night to do it in." He settled his hat, satisfied. "I did try to make this easy." He climbed up into the clean buggy and gathered the reins, and the soft town horse leaned into the traces. But before he clucked it forward, he leaned down from the seat toward the porch, toward the boy standing white and rigid at Silas's shoulder, and he dropped his voice to something low and private, meant for a child and not for a man. "You needn't look so grieved, boy," Boone murmured. "Blood's cheap out here, cheaper than you'd think, and a strong pair of hands like yours, why, a boy like you fetches a fine price in the mills back east. They'll work you hard and feed you enough. It's more than most orphans get." He straightened, touched his hat brim to Hannah, and put the horse into motion. He had meant the words for Eli, but Silas stood close, closer than Boone had reckoned, and Silas heard every one of them fall. Nell was crying into his leg. Hannah had her arm around Eli, and the boy was trembling with a rage too big for his body, and Hannah was saying his name soft over and over to hold him in one piece. The buggy rocked away down the lane, its clean wheels throwing up the good prairie dust, growing small against the red of the failing sun. Silas did not move. He watched it go and he said nothing at all, and Hannah, glancing up at him, felt the change before she saw it and went quiet mid-word. Because the thing in his face had gone still. Not the stillness of a man beaten, nor of a man thinking. It was the stillness of deep water gone hard with the first ice of winter, a cold laid down under everything, silent and total, that would not thaw and would not crack and would bear any weight a man cared to put on it. His jaw had set. His eyes had not left the shrinking buggy. Whatever had lived behind them a moment ago, the doubt, the fear for the paper folded useless against his heart, had frozen clean over, and what remained beneath the ice was simpler and older and would not be reasoned with. "Silas," Hannah said quietly. "Take them inside," he said. His voice was low and even and terrible in its evenness. "Feed them, keep the girl from the window. Silas, look at me. Whatever you're thinking." I heard what he said to the boy. He turned his head then, and Hannah drew a small breath at what she found in his face. He looked down at Nell clinging to his leg, and he laid his rough hand over her braid again, gentle as ever, that same tenderness moving beneath the ice like a current under a frozen river. "I heard him, and no paper he carries and no law he's bought is taking these children off this land." He looked back to the empty lane where the dust was settling. "He'll learn what my word is worth," Silas said. "Every man in this county's going to learn it." Chapter 7, Racing the Law. Silas did not sleep that night. and neither, he suspected, did the house. He sat at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low and the guardianship forms spread flat under his hands, reading them again by the yellow light, though he had read them a dozen times and knew every line by heart. The paper was good paper. The words were plain and lawful, but a signature space was still a signature space, and a blank line meant nothing until a judge put his name beside it. Down the hall he could hear Nell turning in her sleep, and once, faintly, Eli's cot creaking as the boy rose to stand at the window and watch the dark yard for a buggy that was no longer there. Boone was gone, but the thing he'd said on the porch had stayed behind like a smell. Boys like you fetch a good price in the mills. Silas smoothed the paper flat again with the side of his hand and made himself breathe slow. At first light, Hannah's little cart came rattling up the track before he'd even finished the milking, and he knew from the set of her shoulders that she'd slept no better than he had. She climbed down without waiting for his hand and came straight to him across the yard, her shawl pulled tight against the dawn chill. "I've thought it through half the night," she said. "You cannot simply wait for him, Silas. If you wait, you lose. A man like that keeps the clock in his own pocket." "I know it." He took the milk pail from the ground because his hands wanted something to do. "Come inside. The children shouldn't wake to us, whispering in the yard like there's a funeral." They laid it out over coffee, the three plans that were really one plan pulling in three directions. Silas would ride to the county seat and file for guardianship in his own name, put the true claim on record before Boone's false one could take root. Hannah would gather what could be gathered here, sworn words from the neighbors who'd seen the children these past months, from Doc Prout, who had ridden out once when Nell took a chill. Anyone who could stand up and say these two were fed and schooled and loved, not harbored like stolen goods. "And the papers he carries are forged," Hannah said. "We both know it, but forged well. If we could reach the real records, the state office that he claims appointed him, and show there's no such appointment." "That office is 4 days east by rail," Silas said, "and the rail's 2 days from here by wagon. Then we send a wire. A wire he could have a man waiting to intercept, or a clerk he's already paid." Silas turned his cup slowly on the table. "I don't say don't send it. I say don't hang the children's whole lives on a wire arriving clean." Eli had come to the doorway without either of them hearing, barefoot, his shirt half-buttoned. "The judge," he said. "You keep talking round it. When's the judge come?" Silas looked at him a long moment before he answered, because the boy had earned the truth and would smell a lie besides. "Circuit judge rides through the county seat. Storekeeper says he's a week out, maybe more." "A week," Eli's jaw worked. "And that man Boone said sundown tomorrow he'd be back with the sheriff." "He did." "Then a week don't help us none." "It helps us if we can hold the ground till the judge gets here," Silas said. "The law can knock. It can't just take, not without a judge's word behind it, and no judge has said one yet. Boone's counting on us not knowing the difference, on us being scared enough to run or to hand you over quiet." Nell appeared behind her brother, dragging the quilt from her bed with her hair a nest, her eyes still swollen with sleep, and Silas saw, with crying she'd done alone in the night where she thought no one would hear. "Are we going away?" she asked, in that small, flat voice she used when she was trying very hard to be brave and failing. Hannah was up and across the room before Silas could find his tongue, gathering the child, quilt and all, up against her. "No, lamb, no, we are doing the opposite of going away. We are digging in like a tick on a hound. Do you know what a tick does when it wants to stay?" A wet, reluctant laugh. "That's disgusting." "It surely is, and that is exactly how hard we mean to hold on." Silas rode out an hour later with the forms buttoned inside his coat and Eli's insistence still ringing in his ears. The boy had wanted to come, had argued it in the yard with his fists balled, and Silas had put a hand flat on his chest, not to push him but to hold him. "I need a man here," he'd said low so only Eli heard it. "Your sister's here, Miss Reed's here. If Boone comes early, somebody with sense has to keep everybody lawful and everybody breathing. You finish what you start, and I'm starting this by leaving you the harder job." Eli had gone still under his hand, and then he'd nodded once, and that had been that. The county seat swallowed the whole day and gave him little back. The clerk at the land office was a soft, careful man who read the forms twice and told Silas what he already feared. That guardianship was the judge's to grant, not a clerk's to stamp, and that until the circuit came through there was nothing to be filed but intention. He would enter the intention. He would date it. That much he could do. There was a man asking, the clerk added, not lifting his eyes from his ledger. About 2 children, brother and sister, said he had prior custody, papers and all. Went. Day before yesterday, and again this morning. Now the clerk did look up, and there was something unhappy in his face. I'll tell you plain, Mr. Crane, because you seem a plain man. His papers looked righter than yours do. Yours is a father's want. His is a state seal. A seal moves faster than a one in this office, whether it ought to or not. Silas rode home under a sky going bruise-colored at the edges, and he did not push the horse, because there was nowhere left that hurry would get him tonight. He came back to lamplight and the smell of Hannah's stew, and for one held breath in the yard, a picture of the thing he was fighting for, the 4 of them at the table, Nell kneeling on her chair to reach the bread, Eli saying something that made Hannah tip her head back and laugh. Silas stood in the dark outside the window a moment longer than he needed to, memorizing it, the way a man will look twice at a thing he's afraid to lose. They put the children to bed late. Nell went down clutching Hannah's hand until sleep pried her fingers loose. But Eli did not sleep, and near midnight Silas found him out on the porch step in his coat, staring at the same dark the whole day had been made of. Silas lowered himself down beside him. For a while neither said anything. The prairie made its small night sounds, wind and grass, and something far off calling once. I ran the numbers, Eli said finally. Like you taught me, on the cattle, the feed, all of it, this ranch is everything you got. It is. He could take it, if it come to lawyers and fines and such, for harboring us. You could lose the whole place. The boy's voice cracked down the middle and he hated it. Silas could tell, hated it worse than anything. I've been thinking I ought to. Don't, Silas said it quiet, but it landed flat and final as a door. Whatever you been thinking, that runs the same road you ran the first night I found you. I brought you back off that road once. I'll bring you back off it 100 times. Don't make me do it in the cold. Eli was quiet. Then so low Silas almost lost it under the wind. I don't want to stay just till the grass turns. That's what Nell asked you way back, just till the grass turns. He dragged his sleeve across his face, furious at himself. I want to stay for good, forever. I never had leave to want a thing like that before, so I'm saying it. I want to stay forever. Silas did not trust his own voice for a moment. He reached over and gripped the boy's shoulder, the way he'd grip a fence post to test it would hold, and he held on, and he said nothing at all because there were no words worth as much as the grip, and the boy understood him. He felt the shoulder shake once under his hand and then go still and steady and lean into it. They sat like that a long while. When Silas came inside, Hannah was still up, waiting by the banked fire with 2 cups. She handed him one and did not ask what had passed on the porch. He told her anyway, most of it, and she listened with her whole face the way she did. Whatever comes, she said when he'd finished, I want you to hear me say it so it's said and can't be unsaid. They will not be split. Not Eli to a mill and Nell to some far-off house, not 1 mile of prairie between them, not while I've breath. I don't care what his paper says. I stand with you on this, Silas, all the way to whatever end it has. He looked at her across the little cups and the dying fire, and something in his chest that had been braced hard for 2 days eased, just slightly, just enough. I never asked you to take this weight, he said. You didn't have to, she said it simply. I set it on my own back the day that child fell asleep in my lap. That's how it works. Nobody asks. You just wake up one morning and find you die for somebody, and there's no undoing it. He almost said the thing then. It rose all the way up in him and pressed against his teeth. But there were footsteps of the day yet to answer for, and the words felt too large and too fragile to spend in a room this tired. So he only nodded, and she seemed to hear everything he didn't say, and that was its own kind of speaking. Sundown of the next day came, as sundowns do indifferent. Silas heard the horses before he saw them, more than one, coming steady up the track, not hurried, the walk of men who believed they had the right of way. He set down the harness he'd been mending and stepped into the yard, and behind him he heard Hannah gather the children back toward the door. Sheriff Mabry rode at the front, a heavy, gray-mustached man Silas had known 10 years, and he had the decency to look like a man riding to a hanging he didn't hold with. Boone rode a length behind him, upright and pleased, a folded paper riding openly in his gloved hand like a flag. Silas, the sheriff said, and reined up and didn't get down. You know I'd sooner be any place but here. I know it bends. Mabry's jaw moved like he was chewing something bitter. He drew a document from his coat and held it, not offering it yet, as though holding it kept it from being true. "It's a court order, filed proper at the county seat this morning, signed by the standing magistrate while the circuit judge is out. It names Mr. Boone here the appointed party and directs me to see the 2 children surrendered into his custody." He looked past Silas to the doorway, to the small, pale faces there, and something in the old lawman's eyes went to grief. "I got no room in it, Silas. I read it 3 times looking for the room. There ain't any." "How long?" Silas said. "You got till sundown tomorrow to give them up." Mabry's voice dropped rough. "Or I'm bound to come back and take you in for it, harboring obstruction, the whole ugly list he's written out. And that's a road that ends with you in a cell and them handed over anyhow, and nobody the better for it." He held the man's eyes a beat longer. "I'm sorry. God knows I am. Sundown tomorrow." Behind Silas, Nell had begun, very quietly, to cry, and Boone, from his horse, was smiling into the last of the light. Chapter 8, The Longest Night. The lamp had burned down to a thumb of oil by the time Silas gave up pretending to sleep. He sat at the kitchen table where he had sat 10,000 nights alone, before the children, before Hannah, before any of it, and he looked at the folded guardianship papers he'd carried back from the county seat with such foolish hope. They were worth nothing now. A judge a week away. A sheriff bound by an order that bore a seal Silas couldn't prove was false. And out there in the dark somewhere, Ezra Boone waiting on sundown tomorrow like a patient buzzard on a fence post. Hannah had stayed past dark, which she'd never done, propriety be hanged, because none of them wanted to be the first to say the thing they were all thinking. She sat across from him now with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold, and her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She'd cried herself out earlier, quiet in the pantry where the children wouldn't see. "I rode to Doc Prout's this afternoon," she said, "and to the Halloran place. Everyone says the same thing, Silas. If you keep them past sundown, you're a criminal, and then they're not orphans you took in out of Christian mercy. They're fugitives you're hiding, and a fugitive child," her voice caught. "A fugitive child gets treated worse than a placed one. That's what they're telling me. That the kind thing, the only lawful thing, is to give them up and fight it clean through the court after." "Give them up," Silas said the words like he was testing whether his mouth could form them without breaking. "Hand Nell to that man. Watch him load Eli in a wagon." "I know. You know what he'll do with them." Silas's voice was very low because Eli slept light and the boy's room was only a wall away. "He told me, on this porch. He said blood was cheap and boys like Eli fetch a good price in the mills. He'll put the boy in some spinning house 300 miles east, and he'll sell Nell to whoever'll take a girl to scrub floors. And he'll do it in 2 different directions so they never find their way back to each other. That's not the law taking custody, Hannah. That's a man selling children, and the paper in his coat just makes it legal." Hannah closed her eyes. "I know," she said again, and there was nothing else in the whole language that answered it. The thing about the dark hour is that it doesn't announce itself. It just arrives, and you find you've been sitting in it a while. Silas had faced hard things in his life. He'd buried a wife in ground he broke with his own pick. He'd wintered alone with nothing but a stove and his own thoughts. He was a man who prided himself that his word once given was iron, that he finished what he started and protected what was his. And now here was the one thing that iron couldn't fix. He could not outwork it, or outweight it, or outride it. A man had come with a piece of paper and the whole weight of the state behind it, and Silas Crane, for all his principle, could not lawfully keep 2 children he'd have died for. The wall between them and Nell's small voice, thin with sleep and fear. "Mr. Silas." She stood in the doorway in the nightgown Hannah had sewn her feet bare on the cold plank floor, her hair a wild, pale tangle. 7 years old, and she already knew the shape of grief. She'd learned it burying her mother and father. She could smell it on a room. "You should be sleeping little bit," Silas said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant. She didn't move. She looked at the papers on the table, and at Hannah's red eyes, and back to Silas, and her chin began to tremble in that way that undid him worse than any wound. "Is the man gonna take us?" she asked. "The one with the buggy, is he gonna come back and take me and Eli?" Silas opened his mouth, and for the first time in his grown life he found he could not make a word come. Because he had never lied to these children, that was part of the code, part of the iron. A man's word means nothing if he'll spend it cheap, and he could not tell her no. He could not promise her the one thing she needed. The silence stretched, and Nell watched it stretch, and he saw the exact moment the child understood that his silence was the answer. Her face crumpled. You said, it came out a whisper. You said nobody was gonna split us up, you said. Nell, you promised. And she was crying now, the terrible open crying of a small child, and she didn't run to him. That was the part that broke him clean through. She didn't run to him because for the first time she wasn't sure he could catch her. Hannah was up and around the table and had the girl gathered against her, murmuring, rocking. But Nell's wet eyes stayed fixed on Sela's over Hannah's shoulder, wide and betrayed and asking. And Sela's crane, 36 years old and hard as a wagon axle, put his face in his hands at his own kitchen table and could not look at her. He got Nell settled near midnight, sitting on the edge of her bed with his big hand covering her whole back until her breathing went slow. He didn't promise her anything. He'd learned that lesson in one night. He only said, "I'm not done fighting yet, you hear me? Whatever happens, I'm not done." Which was true and was all the truth he had. It was maybe 2 hours later, in the dead black middle of the night, that some old instinct woke him. The same instinct that had once told him a coyote was in the smokehouse when it was really a starving boy with a rusted knife. He lay still and listened, and under the prairie wind he heard it, the soft complaint of the barn door, and then the low, careful sound of a horse being walked, not ridden, out past the corral so the hoofbeats wouldn't carry. Sela's was out of bed and into his boots before he'd finished the thought. Eli's room was empty. The blanket was folded. The boy had made his bed, God help him, made his bed like a man setting his affairs in order, and on the pillow was a scrap of slate with 3 words scratched in Nell's schoolhouse chalk. Let her stay. Sela's didn't stop for a coat. He caught the boy a mile and a half out, a small dark shape leading the old gelding by the reins across ground silvered by a half-moon. Eli heard him coming and didn't run. He just stopped and stood and squared up the way he had that first night, ready to be hit or hollered at, ready to bargain. Go back, Eli said before Sela's could speak. His voice was cracking between the boy it had been and the man it was trying to be. I did the sum, Sela's. He wants both of us because 2's worth more than 1, and because splitting us hurts more and he likes it that hurts. But if I ride in and give myself up before sundown, if I go to him on my own, he's got his boy for the mill, that's the money part, and maybe he leaves Nell be. Maybe you and Miss Hannah can keep her. One's easier to hide than 2. One little girl nobody hunts that hard for. Eli, it's the only way it works. The boy was crying now too, furious about it, swiping at his face with his sleeve. Don't you see I did the figuring? I'm the man of us. I've been the man of us since Pa died. It's my job to keep her, and the only way I can keep her is to not be with her. He drew a shaking breath. You taught me that. You finish what you start. You protect what's yours. She's mine to protect, so let me. And there it was, his own code, his own iron, handed back to him in the dark by a 12-year-old boy about to sell himself to a slaver to save his sister. Sela's felt something in his chest give way that had held firm through every hard thing his life had brought him. He crossed the space between them, and he did not grab the boy or shake him. He took him by both shoulders, gentle, the way you'd gentle a colt, and he got down on one knee in the cold grass so they were eye to eye under that half-moon on the empty black prairie with no one and nothing for miles to hear. Now you listen to me, Sela said, and his voice shook and he let it. You listen because I'm only going to say this the once and then it's said, and a thing I say is a thing I mean. You are not a price. Do you hear me? You are not a coin I spend to buy your sister safe. That's his arithmetic, boy, not mine, and I will not do sums in his book. But I'm not finished. Sela's gripped harder. I've got a ranch back there my father broke his back to hold. I've got a name in this county nobody's ever spoke sideways. I've got land and stock and a house with my dead wife's name carved in the doorframe, and I want you to understand me, Eli. I would sign every acre of it over to that buzzard. I would burn it to the black dirt. I would hang for it before I let him take one of you. Before I let him take either one of you. You are not worth less than my ranch. You are worth more than everything I own put together, and I have not told you that plain, and that is my failing, and I'm telling you now. Eli stood shaking, holding the reins, holding on. You ran to save her, Sela said, softer. That's the finest, dumbest, bravest thing a boy ever did, and it's exactly what I'd have done at your age, and you're never to do it again. We don't buy each other's safety by walking away. That's not how a family holds. A family holds by standing in one place all together and daring the world to come move it. He pulled the boy in then, and Eli broke against his chest, 12 years old and finally allowed to just be a frightened child. I brought you home the first night, Sela said into his hair. I'll bring you home every night I've got breath, that's my word. And you know what my word's worth. They stood a long while like that in the grass, the horse cropping quietly beside them, before Silas got them both mounted and turned back toward the low, dark shape of the house, and the lamp Hannah had lit again in the window. He didn't sleep the rest of that night. He sat on the porch with Eli asleep at last inside, and Hannah beside him with a blanket over both their shoulders, and he watched the black sky go gray, then pearl, then the first hard gold line of morning come up over the prairie he'd told a boy he would burn. And somewhere in that watching, the dark hour turned. "I'm not going to run," Silas said quietly when the light was full enough to see her face. "Running makes them fugitives forever, you said it yourself, and a crane doesn't run anyhow. And I'm not going to hand them over. Not to him, not to the sheriff, not to a paper with a lying seal on it." Hannah turned to look at him. "Then what's left, Silas? There's no third road. Sundown comes and it's one or the other." "There's the truth," he said. "That man's paper is a forgery. I know it in my bones, and Doc knows those young'uns folks died of fever, and the storekeeper heard Boone talk his finder's fee out loud in front of God and everybody. Boone wants this done quiet in a wagon on a lonesome road, because his kind of business only works in the dark." Silas stood, and the morning gold was on his face, and the exhaustion had burned off him and left only the iron underneath, bright and hard. "So I'll not give him the dark. When that man comes for my children, he'll not come to an empty road. He'll come to the middle of town with the whole county watching and every honest soul in it, and he can make his claim out loud in the light, where a lie has to stand up in front of neighbors." He looked out over his land. "I gave those children my word," Silas said. "Law or no law, sundown or no sundown, I mean to stand on it in front of the whole world. Let them come." Chapter 9, The Whispered Claim. The town of Clearwater had not seen so many people crowded into one room since the flood 2 springs back. Word travels fast on the prairie, and word of a rancher who meant to stand against the law had traveled faster than most. They packed the front hall of the county building shoulder to shoulder, ranch hands with their hats crushed in their fists, storekeepers in their aprons, women who had left their bread half-risen on the counter to come and see. Silas Crane stood at the front of them all with a child pressed to either side of him, and he did not look at the crowd. He looked at the man behind the long oak table. The circuit judge had come 3 days early. That was the one mercy in all of it, and Silas had learned not to trust mercy that came easy, so he held himself ready for the floor to fall out from under him at any moment. Judge Alden was a lean old man with white side whiskers and eyes the color of creek ice, and he had spent the last hour listening without moving so much as a finger. Ezra Boone had done most of the talking. "Your Honor," Boone was saying now, spreading his papers across the table like a gambler laying down a winning hand, "I am a patient man and a lawful one. I have traveled a hard road to do a hard duty. These children are wards of the state, orphaned and unclaimed, and I hold the appointment to see them properly placed. Here is the seal. Here is the signature of Commissioner Harlan Voss, who granted my agency over them not 2 months past. Everything a court could ask, in order and in ink." He straightened, and his smile turned toward Silas with a sorrow that fooled no one who knew him. "I take no pleasure in parting a man from his affections, but affection is not law, and this man has no paper, no claim, and no right." A murmur went through the room. Silas felt Nell's small fingers twist tighter into his coat. He put his hand flat against her back and held it there. Judge Alden lifted the top document and turned it toward the light of the window. "The paper is his argument, Mr. Crane," he said, and his voice was dry as August. "What is yours?" Silas opened his mouth. Before he could speak, Hannah Reed stepped forward from the wall where she had stood white-knuckled through the whole of it. "Ours is the truth, Your Honor," she said, "and we have brought people who can speak it." Doc Prout came first. He was a heavy, tired man who had buried more of this county than he cared to count, and he did not raise his voice. "I knew the children's folks," he said. "Tom and Sarah Whitfield, out on the creek flats east of here. Fever took them both inside a week last of the spring. I signed the death record with my own hand. It's filed in Dawson County, and any man can ride and read it. Their 2 young ones were left with no living kin." He looked at Boone, and there was nothing kind in the look. "No commissioner appointed a soul over them, because until this man came sniffing after a fee, no soul in the territory knew they were orphaned but me and the God who took their parents." "That proves nothing," Boone said smoothly. "A death record and an appointment are 2 separate matters." "Let the man finish being finished," Judge Alden said, "and then we'll see what's separate." The storekeeper, Amos Finch, came next, turning his hat around and around. He was not a brave man, and it cost him to stand there, but he had a daughter Nell's age, and it had cost him more not to. "He come into my store," Finch said, nodding at Boone without looking at him. "Weeks back, before any of this. Asked me had I seen 2 runaway orphans, a brother and sister. I said I hadn't. And he leaned on my counter and he said," Finch swallowed. "He said there was a finder's fee in it. Said a boy that age fetched a fair price at the mills up north, and a girl went easy to a placement house, and if I helped him lay hands on the pair, I'd see a cut of both." The room had gone very still. "I told him I dealt in flour and not in children. He laughed and went on his way. That's the man's holy duty, Your Honor. That's what it looks like up close." The murmur was a growl now. Boone's smile did not slip, but something moved behind his eyes, quick and cornered. "Hearsay from a shopkeep with a grudge," he said. "Your Honor, I object to this theater. My papers stand. Examine them yourself." The seal of the Territorial Commission. "I intend to." Judge Alden had already bent over the documents, and now he drew a pair of spectacles from his vest and set them on his nose. For a long moment the only sound in the room was the creak of the floor as men shifted their weight. The judge turned one page, turned it back, held the seal to the window, then held it beside a second paper drawn from his own leather case, and his jaw began to work slowly, the way a man's does when he is deciding how angry he intends to allow himself to become. "Mr. Boone," he said at last, and his dry voice had gone flat and cold. "This seal reads Territorial Commission of the 2nd District. There is no 2nd District. There has not been a 2nd District since they redrew the lines in 71. He set the page down. "And this signature, Commissioner Harlan Voss." "A fine and upstanding official," Boone said, but his voice had thinned. "Harlan Voss," said the judge, "has been dead 4 years. I stood at his graveside. I helped carry him." He lifted his ice-colored eyes over the rims of his spectacles. "You have handed a court of law the signature of a dead man, sir, under the seal of a district that does not exist, and asked me to give you 2 living children on the strength of it." The room broke like a dam. Somewhere a woman said "God above," and somewhere a man laughed once, short and hard. Sheriff Mabry, who had stood by the door through all of it with his thumbs in his belt and his face like a man swallowing gravel, took a step forward off the wall. And Ezra Boone, seeing the last of his paper turn to ash in front of him, stopped being a smooth man. He moved fast, the way a rat moves when the barn's afire, not toward the door but toward the children, his hand shooting out to close on Eli's arm, as though he might yet drag his prophet bodily out into the street and be gone before the law could knot itself around him. "They're mine by right," he snarled, all the courtesy stripped off him now, "and I'll have what's." Nell screamed. Eli twisted, and for half a heartbeat the 2 children were being pulled. One grabbed, one grabbing, both of them wrenched toward the one thing on earth they feared most. The splitting, the separate wagons, the never again. And in that half a heartbeat Sela's crane moved too. He did not strike Boone. That was the thing men spoke of afterward in the store and at the rail fences, the thing they could not get over. A lesser man would have swung and been justified, and it would have settled nothing. Silas broke Boone's grip with one hard turn of his wrist, put his own body between the man and the children like a wall goes between a house and the wind, and then he did not chase, did not shout, did not raise his hand at all. He turned his back on Ezra Boone as though the man had ceased to exist. He went down on one knee on the plank floor, and he pulled both children in against his chest, one arm around each of them, and he brought his mouth close to the space between their 2 frightened faces, and he spoke low, so low that the judge leaned in, so low that the front rank of the crowd went silent to catch it. So low it was almost only for the 3 of them, and the words came out worn smooth, as if he had been holding them a long while. "Your mind." Nell went still against him. "Do you hear me?" His voice did not shake, and that was what carried it to the back of the room, the not shaking, the certainty of a man laying down the one law he had never once broken. "Blood or no blood, paper or no paper. You're mine, and there is no man alive, in this room or out of it, walks out of here with what's mine." Eli, 12 years old and hard as a green branch, who had buried his own mother and father with his own hands, and had not let himself weep since. Eli made a sound against Silas's shoulder like something giving way, and gripped a fistful of the man's coat, and held on. For a moment nobody in the whole packed hall said a word. Then Judge Alden brought his palm down flat on the oak table, not as a blow, but as a period at the end of a sentence. "That," the old man said, is the truest claim I have heard argued in 30 years on this bench, and I have heard men argue over gold. He drew a sheet of clean paper toward him and reached for his pen. Silas Crane. This court finds no lawful appointment standing against you, and finds instead a man plainly fit to keep what he has kept. By the authority vested in me as circuit judge of this district, the true district, I grant you emergency guardianship of the minors Eli and Nell Whitfield, effective this hour, pending the permanent order I will sign myself before I leave this county. The pen scratched. Let it be entered. He lifted his eyes to the door. Sheriff Mabry, take Mr. Boone into custody on charges of fraud, forgery, and the forging of a dead official's hand against the seal of a court. I expect he's practiced at it. I expect there are other children behind him we'll want to find. His mouth thinned. See that he doesn't practice anything on the way to the cell. Boone started to speak. Mabry's big hand closed on his collar, and the words turned into nothing, and the sheriff walked him toward the door through a crowd that did not part gently for him. Someone jeered. Someone else spat on the floor at his boot. Then the door banged shut on him, and it was done, just like that, after all the sleepless nights and the long black ride across the prairie and the sundown deadline that had hung over the ranch like a noose. It was simply, ordinarily done, and the room let out its breath all at once and became a roar. They were cheering. Men were pounding Silas on the back, and he barely felt it. Hannah had both hands pressed to her mouth and tears standing in her eyes, and she was laughing at the same time, coming toward them through the crush of people. Doc Prout was shaking the judge's hand. Somewhere a hat sailed up toward the rafters. Silas heard none of it clearly. He was still on his knee on the floor with the two of them in his arms, and he was not in any hurry to get up. It was Nell who drew back first. She put her small hands on his weathered face, one on each cheek, the way she did when she wanted the whole of his attention and would not settle for less. And she looked at him with her wet eyes enormous, and she asked him the question she had asked once before, months ago, on a wagon seat under a lowering sky when he had not been able to answer it. "Mister," she whispered, "what do I call you now?" The hall was loud around them, and the two of them were alone inside it. Silas looked at her and at the boy still gripping his coat, and he felt the word rise up in him from somewhere deeper than his voice usually went. A word he had not owned in a long, lonely time. A word he had thought the fever and the empty years had taken from him for good. His throat worked. When it came rough, and it came through tears he did not trouble to hide, and it was the easiest thing he had ever said in his life. "Pa," he told her. "You call me Pa." And Nell Whitfield threw both arms around her father's neck and hid her face in his collar. And Eli's hard grip finally loosened, only so that he could get his own arm the rest of the way around them both. And Silas Crane knelt on the floor of the county building with his whole family gathered in against his chest. And for once in his careful, guarded life, the solitary man let himself be held. Chapter 10, in all but name and now in full. Autumn came softly to the prairie that year, the tall grass turning the color of new bread, the mornings edged with a cold that meant only comfort now, for there was a fire in the hearth and a full house to warm. Silas Crane stood on the porch with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, and he was not thinking of his coffee. He was watching the yard. Nell had named the last of the new chickens, a scrawny black hen she called Judge Wharton, after the circuit judge who had banged his gavel and made her family reel, which had made the judge laugh until his eyes ran. Eli was down at the corral working a green colt on a long line, moving the way Silas had taught him, patient, sure, a boy grown into the shape of a man's steadiness. 6 weeks had passed since the day in town. The papers had come from the county seat in a stiff envelope with a wax seal that did not lie, and Silas had read them 3 times before he believed them, and then he had folded them into the tin box where he kept his wife's wedding ring and the deed to the land, because that was where a man kept the things that could not be taken from him. Ezra Boone was gone to the territorial prison, tried and sentenced for forgery, and for the fraud he had worked on a dozen orphaned children across 3 counties. Sheriff Mabry had ridden out himself to tell Silas the sentence, hat in his hands, and had said, "I'm sorry it went the way it did, Crane. The law's a slow horse, but it got there." Silas had shaken his hand and meant it. There were other children, Mabry said, being sorted back to kin or to honest homes now that Boone's ledgers had been opened. Brothers and sisters who would not, after all, be split across the territory into separate mills. Silas had thought a long while about those children he would never meet, and about how near a thing it had been, and had said nothing. because some gratitude runs too deep for words and only comes out as work, and quiet, and keeping what you have close. You'll wear a hole in that board standing there. He turned. Hannah Reed had come around the side of the house with a basket of the last tomatoes on her hip, her sleeves pushed to the elbow, a smudge of garden dirt on her cheek. She had been coming most every day now, and the house had stopped pretending it did not need her. "Watching my son break a colt," Silas said. The word still felt new in his mouth and precious for it. My son. He said it every chance he got, the way a man tongues a tooth that no longer aches, marveling. Hannah set the basket down and came to stand beside him, and for a while they said nothing, which was its own kind of conversation between them by now. The colt circled. Eli's voice carried up thin and easy across the cold air. Down by the woodpile Nell was reading aloud to Judge Wharton the hen, sounding out each word with fierce concentration, her finger dragging under the line. "She's near through the whole primer," Hannah said. "By Christmas she'll be reading scripture to you at the table." "Lord help me," but he was smiling. Hannah laughed, and then the laugh faded into something quieter, and Silas felt the moment come up on him the way weather comes across the flatland, seen a long way off and arriving all at once. He had held these words a year. He had held them through the schoolteacher's first visits, through suppers and songs and the long, terrible days of the fight, held them the way he held everything, behind his teeth, where a careful man kept the things that mattered until he was sure. He was sure. "Hannah," he set the cold coffee on the rail, "I'm not a man of many words, you've had cause to notice." "I've noticed," she said gently. "So I'll say the ones I've got and not dress them up." He turned to face her, and his voice, which had faced down an armed man on this same porch without a tremor, was not entirely steady now. "These children have a father. That got settled in front of the whole town. But a house isn't whole with one leg cut short, and this house has been leaning toward you since the first day you walked into it and taught my girl her letters." He drew a breath. "I'm asking you to marry me, Hannah Reed, not to fill a place, because there isn't a place, you're already the middle of everything here. I'm asking you to let me put your name to what's already true." For a moment she only looked at him, and her eyes shone, and he thought with a lurch that he had waited too long or spoken too plain. Then she reached up and laid her palm against his jaw, dirt and all. "Silas Crane," she said, "I have been waiting for you to catch up to me for the better part of a year." "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes." She was laughing and crying at once. "That has been a yes since before you knew you'd ask." He kissed her then, there on the porch in the cold, clean morning, and down at the corral a boy's whoop went up loud enough to spook the colt, and a small voice from the woodpile shrieked, "He kissed her! Eli, he kissed her!" And Judge Wharton the hen fled squawking under the porch, and Silas Crane, who had once meant to live and die alone on a quiet piece of prairie, laughed into his wife-to-be's hair with his whole ruined solitude undone. They married 3 weeks later, on the ranch, at the hour when the sun goes gold and lays itself down long across the grass. There was no church for miles, so they made one of the prairie. The parson rode out from town, and half the town came behind him. The storekeeper who had testified, Doc Pruitt in his good coat, Sheriff Mabry with his star polished, neighbors who 6 months back had only known Silas as the quiet man who kept to himself. They stood in a loose ring in the grass where Silas had laid down planks for a floor that opened onto the whole wide world, and the wind carried the smell of the coming winter and the smell of the wedding supper cooling on the long tables, and it was, everyone agreed after, the finest gathering the county had seen in years. Nell went first down the aisle they had made of trampled grass, and she did not walk so much as spin, scattering wildflowers from a basket, asters and late goldenrod she had picked herself that morning. So many that by the time she reached the front she had thrown them in fistfuls and was simply running out of flowers and joy at the same rate. She wore a blue dress Hannah had sewn her, and her hair was in ribbons, and she was 7 years old and the happiest creature on God's earth. Eli walked his stepmother down the aisle. They had settled it between them, the two of them, without asking anyone. When Hannah had come out of the house in her pale dress with no one to give her away, being a widow with her people all back east, Eli had stepped up in his ironed shirt with his hair wetted down and offered her his arm, grave as a deacon. "A woman ought to be walked in," he'd said. "That's proper." And Hannah had taken the arm of the 12-year-old man of the house, and the sight of it put a hitch in more than one throat in that crowd, for they all knew what that boy had carried, and how far he had walked to get here, and that he had once offered to give his own life away on this very ground to save his sister. He handed Hannah to Silas at the front, and Silas gripped his shoulder, that same wordless grip, the whole language of them in it. And Eli stepped back to stand beside Nell, and the parson opened his book. The vows were the plain old ones, and Silas said them in a voice that carried. When it came time, he took the ring from the tin box, not his first wife's that stayed put, a new band, plain silver, that he'd had the smith in town beat out special, and he slid it onto Hannah's finger, and he said, "In all things, as long as I draw breath," which was not in the parson's book, but was more binding than anything that was, for it was a man's own word, and everyone there had learned by now what that was worth on this ranch. They ate as the stars came out. Someone had a fiddle. There was dancing on the plank floor under the first cold stars, and Doc Prout danced with Nell standing on his boots, and Sheriff Mabry allowed as how he might could manage one turn with the new Mrs. Crane, and Eli, when no one was looking too hard, danced one careful dance with the storekeeper's daughter and went red to his ears about it. Late, when the guests had gone and the tables were cleared and the fiddle was quiet, the four of them sat out on the porch the way they had 100 nights now. Nell had the primer in her lap. It was full dark, but she knew the page by heart, and she read it aloud anyway, her voice careful and proud, tracing the words she could no longer see. The house was warm. The bread was on the board. And no one went hungry that night, nor any night after. She looked up. "I made that last part up. It's not in the book." "It's better than the book," Hannah said. "You ought to write your own one of these days. Mrs. Reed that was, she'd have said the same. A girl who reads like you can write like you, given time." Nell considered this with great seriousness. "I'll write one about a mister who finds 2 kids in his smokehouse," she said, "and doesn't turn them in." She yawned enormously. "Only I'll make it so there's a dog in it. There ought to have been a dog." "Next spring," Silas said, "we'll see about a dog." Silas thought about the smokehouse a year gone, and a starved boy with a shaking knife standing between him and the dark, and a small girl's voice giving them away. He thought about stolen bread. There was bread in the house tonight, baked that morning by Hannah's hands, and there would be bread tomorrow, and the children had stopped, somewhere in these months, hiding food in their pockets against a hunger that was never coming back. "Pa," Eli said. He said the word easily now. He had worn it smooth. "The colt'll be ready to ride by spring. I figure to work him myself." "I figure you will," Silas said. Nell had gone heavy against Hannah's side, the primer sliding, her eyes losing the fight. Eli's head tipped back against the post, and the long day took him too, and the 2 children slept the way children sleep only when they are certain, all the way down to the bone, that they are safe. Hannah met his eyes over their heads, that same look they had traded across this porch 100 times, back when neither would say what it meant. She said it now, silent, and he answered it silent, and then she carried Nell in, and he carried Eli, the boy too big for it and neither of them caring, and they laid them down under the roof that was theirs. Silas came back out alone into the cold. The prairie ran off black and endless under more stars than a man could ever count, the same prairie he had once been the only living soul upon. It did not feel empty now. It felt like the wide, dark porch of a full house. He stood a while in it. Then he went back in and stopped in the doorway of the room where his children slept, and he said it low, the way he had said it that day in town, kneeling in the dust with a desperate man's hands reaching. Said it now with no man to fight and nothing left to prove, only the truth of it, worn in and permanent as the land. "Mine," Silas Crane whispered, "always." And he closed the door soft and left them to their sleeping, and the house held its warmth against the coming winter, and no one went hungry that night, nor any night after.